Welcome to The Backstory. I'm your host, Anne Hancock Toomey. Over the course of my career, I've had the privilege to work with and learn from and guide some incredible leaders, mostly in healthcare, but not always. The Backstory is a chance for me to talk to some of them, unpack who they are and where they came from, and how it all influences who they are today and how they lead. Ultimately, each conversation offers a case study in what I'm calling authentic leadership. Let me now invite you into our conversation for the real backstory. Today, I am delighted to welcome Pete November to the podcast. Pete is currently CEO of Ochsner Health in New Orleans, of course, a large academic health system serving several states in the Gulf South. He is someone that I am really glad to call a friend over the past decade or so. Welcome to the podcast, Pete.
Thank you, Anne. It is great to be here with you, and I'm glad to call you a friend as well.
Pete, you have had a terrific career in healthcare, which we're going to talk about today. And as I look at it, it's three big chapters. And I don't know if that's the way you see it as well on your journey, but we'll take apart each one of them. You started out as a healthcare M&A attorney in private practice, counseling leaders of organizations on how to grow, which has really been theme in your career, I think. How do you grow healthcare organizations to increase access, to serve more patients? And then you moved in-house to the LHC Group, which is now the nation's largest home health provider. And then I guess the third chapter would be landing at Ochsner, what, a dozen years ago now? Is that right?
Right. Yeah, it's almost 12 years ago now.
That's crazy, because I think that's about as long as we've known each other. And I
Right.
met you when you were the general counsel, and since that time, I think you've held nearly every leadership position at Ochsner, and
Yeah,
of course, became CEO 18 months ago. So congrats.
thanks. And yeah, as I say, I kept getting jobs. They're like, you're not good at that job, so we'll just give you another job. And eventually, like, the CEO job is the last job they could give me. So here I am.
Oh, okay. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, that's how it happened. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
It's been amazing to see what you and the team have done there at Ochsner over the years. Now you've got 37,000 employees, 5,000 physicians, 46 hospitals, hundreds of outpatient sites, and certainly a big reputation for quality and for innovation. So three big chapters, quite a journey. I imagine you've learned a few things along the way.
I have learned a lot along the way from a lot of different people who I wouldn't be sitting here had it not been the learning I've had from lots of different great people over my career.
As I thought about launching this podcast about authentic leadership and unpacking what it takes to be the kind of magnetic leader that people choose to work for time and again, I thought of you, and I'll tell you why. We've both had the opportunity to work for some highly successful leaders over the years, and there are a lot of different styles of leadership. Some more effective than others, admittedly. And I have found that the kind of leaders that I admire the most are certainly visionary, super sharp, truly like fierce about their mission and their business. But the best of the best are also just real. They're self-aware, they're genuine, they're not afraid to make mistakes. They believe that a good idea can come from anywhere, right? They prioritize listening, they reward honesty, and they're just plain fun to be around and to be in a foxhole with. And my friend, you are 100% one of those people. So what a cool opportunity for me and for those listening to unpack how you became the leader that you are today, because that doesn't happen certainly overnight.
Thanks, Anne. I appreciate that. And you've been one of those people I've learned from over my career as well. And I've said this to you before. I know I wouldn't be sitting here doing this podcast with you as a CEO had it not been for our friendship and for all the great advice that you gave me along the way.
Thank you for that. I would like to start where every good story begins, and that is in the great state of Kentucky. So you are originally from rural Kentucky, just like myself. And I hate that we didn't know each other growing up, but alas, true Big Blue fans always seem to find each other in life, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So actually, I will start a little bit even before rural Kentucky. I was actually born in Connecticut, believe it or not, and lived there till I was about 9 years old. And then my parents got divorced and my dad stayed in Connecticut, and I moved with my mom to rural Kentucky, Boyle County, Kentucky. It's hometown of Danville, Kentucky, as Center College. And we moved there because that's where my grandparents lived. And so I moved there and was there from fifth grade through high school. And my mom, one of the things that shaped me in healthcare was my mom was a nurse. And so I was raised by a single mom who was a nurse and watched her go to work every day and take care of her patients. And as I say often, mom didn't care at all about financials. In healthcare, mom cared about what could she do for the patients and their families. And so that certainly shaped me. And then growing up in a small town in Kentucky, it wasn't like I didn't grow up with wealth or means. We had sort of a meager upbringing. So in a lot of ways, where I am today is something that I've never imagined, sitting there in Boyle County, Kentucky. And I know I'm really blessed to be where I am. And again, as I said, it's because of a lot of great people along the way.
I love it. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Wow. I get asked this, if I could do life over again, what would I do? If I could come back again, I would have been a Navy SEAL, is
Really?
what I would have been. I could come back. Yeah.
Wow.
I would have been a Navy SEAL because I love the teamwork aspect when you read about the teamwork of Navy SEALs and just how tight they are. And one of my favorite things in life was when I played high school football. And one of the things I loved about it was just how close we were as a team and just those relationships. And so I think would have been awesome to be a Navy SEAL because of that. I think also just the ability to protect the country and to do all the adventurous things that they do. I think that would be, if I could come back and do it again, that's what I would do.
Very cool. It's like being a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly like being a lawyer. Yeah. People think Navy SEAL, lawyer, and I'm also an accountant, so I'm a complete nerd. Sure.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so what was your first job, and what'd you learn from it?
My very first job was flipping hamburgers at Wendy's. And I turned 16. My mom was like, hey, I was like, I want a car. And mom was like, hey, if you want a car, you're going to have to work. And so I got a job at Wendy's. And it was one thing I learned is it was very embarrassing wearing your Wendy's costume with the hat. And the high school cheerleading team would show up and there you were in your Wendy's costumes. There were moments that were difficult. And at that point, there were a lot of people that were 10, 15, 20 years older than me working there. And so I had to learn how to work with adults and responsibility. And so I did learn a lot from that.
I have
I
often
wait.
said that I think it should be, like, required by law that everyone wait tables or work in a restaurant environment. You
Yeah,
just learn a lifetime of lessons in that experience. Alright, so talk about you chose, of course, the University of Kentucky, as
sure.
most good Kentuckians do, and then launched a career into law. So talk a little bit about that and why you picked the legal profession and your career as a young lawyer.
Yeah. So I went to the University of Kentucky, one, because that's where everybody in my family had gone on my mom's side. And then also, as a good Kentuckian, I can remember my grandfather taking me to Rupp Arena to see my first basketball game. I think I was 10 years old and I could go sit in the seats in Rupp Arena where he took me if I had to go today. And
Oh,
so
wow.
a brainwashed Kentucky fan. And also, honestly, I growing up the way I did, I didn't have a lot of choices where I could go to school because I needed to go somewhere where I could afford to go to school.
Sure.
And so I ended up on scholarship at Kentucky. And so that was, besides the fact I loved the school and loved Kentucky, that was a big driver. When I was there, I was really fortunate to have a lot of different experience. So I was president of my fraternity, and then I ended up being student government president at UK when I was an undergrad. And the reason it's relevant for the legal career is at that point in my life, I thought I was going to go into politics. And every good Kentucky politician also went to law school at Kentucky. Some of them went to law school at University of Louisville, but obviously I wasn't going to do that. So they all went to law school at Kentucky. And that was really when I was coming out of undergrad, I thought maybe that's what I'm going to do. And that's what drove me to law school. And then when I got into law school, I got married. I met my wife, Steph, and we've been married for 30 some years. And we got married 2 weeks before I started law school. And then when I got into law school, I realized, ooh, I'm actually going to have to make money because I've got to raise a family and do all this. And my undergrad was in accounting. And so I one summer went and clerked in Atlanta at a law firm called Alston and Bird. And that's where I was like, hey, I think this mergers and acquisitions and that sort of corporate law would be really interesting and more lucrative than being a politician in Kentucky. And so that's how I ended up when I graduated, getting to Atlanta and then worked at Alston and Bird and then worked in a group at Alston and Bird that represented healthcare companies doing all mergers and acquisitions and growth and securities offerings and capital fundraising.
Okay, so you were in private practice at Alston and Bird for what, like 14, 15 years? Is that right?
14 years, 14
Okay.
years. Yeah.
Okay, before we move on to LHC, I'd love to go back, and maybe this is prior to your days as a young lawyer, but as you think back to those early jobs and certainly your experience at Alston and Bird, like who's the first leader that you can remember who impacted you in a positive way?
Yeah, I'm going to give you three, actually. I'll give you three, and it's a different phases. So the very first leader that impacted me super positively actually was my high school football coach. And his name was Coach Rawl. So Coach Rawl was very demanding as a football coach, expected 100% out of you every day, and was very driven. But at the same time, he was at the door every morning when I walked into school, and he would grab me and just ask me how I was doing. Was just an incredibly caring person and almost like a father figure. And so that was my first lesson of you can be a really kind, caring person, and you can also be driven and get stuff done.
Yeah.
And so that's resonated with me. And then when I was in college, when I was student government president, the president of the University of Kentucky was Dr. Charles Weddington at the time. And when you're a student government president, you get to sit on the board of trustees, but it's a weird thing. You're 21 years old, you don't know anything, and you're sitting there with all these business leaders and this university president who's got all this experience. But he was also someone he was really driven, very smart, got a lot of stuff done, but also was very kind to me. Like he would call and check on me. And I'll never forget this day. I was sitting in the student government office and he walked in, and here's the university president. He's like, "Hey, Pete, what are you doing? You want to go have lunch?" And I said, "Sure." So we went up to the cafeteria and we got lunch and we sat in a booth, and we both sat up against the wall with our legs on the bench and just sat there and talked to each other. And I'll never forget that day because here's this guy who's driven and been so successful, but like he's just a normal guy sitting there eating lunch, treating me just as if I'm an equal and not creating anything weird and making me feel really comfortable. And so that was maybe the second lesson in that. And then my third was I got to the firm and there's a partner named John Lowe, and when I have to say his name, I speak with reverence almost. And John was a Harvard Law School grad and also genius. Like his expectations in terms of work product was perfection, very driven, but he also was like this really great family guy. He would always talk to me about how important your family was. And he also was like, "Hey, Pete, whenever you negotiate a deal, I don't care if the person on the other side of the table is the worst jerk in the world. You always show respect. You always tell the truth, and you always live up to your word." And so I had the blessing to work with John. And again, to see that balance of you could be driven and do all this, but you can also be a kind person. You could treat people with respect. And so, I mean, there's been many others, but those three taught me a lot about, I think, who I am today. And when I think about what I want to be.
What a gift to have those
Yeah.
influences so early in your student life and then in your career. What you're describing, particularly sitting at lunch with the University of Kentucky president with your feet up, I mean, that's just visceral. I can picture it. And I think that's
Yeah.
one of the things that I want to shed light on or remind folks is that people who have achieved the highest offices are just people.
Yeah.
They're highly accomplished, they're fierce about performance, of course, but they're just people and they have
Yeah.
families and they've made mistakes and they haven't always been the CEO or the president. And so for him to shown you the human side of the highest office at such a young, impressionable age, I'm sure you carry with you today as you sit in the highest office of your organization. Okay, Pete. So you left Alston and Bird and also Atlanta, moved your
Right.
family to Louisiana to join LHC Group. Tell me about that move. Why did you make the move to go in-house?
Yeah. The really interesting story was in January of 2008, I had made equity partner at Alston and Bird, which you work for
It's a
that.
big deal.
It's a big deal. Like that's what you work for the whole time, and I think when I started at the firm, we had 55 people in my class, and maybe 5 of us made equity partner at the firm, maybe 5 to 7. Prior to that, and even during that time, 2 clients that I had represented. One was LHC Group was going public, and I got a call from an investment banker in Nashville who we'd worked with, who was their investment bank, and said, "Hey, this company needs counsel. Their local counsel is great, but they don't know how to do securities offerings. Would you represent them?" And of course, when you're a partner law firm, the answer is yes, of course I'll represent this company that's going public. And then honestly, I had to like go look at the map, like where's Lafayette, Louisiana exactly, having never been there. But I represented them in their public offering and got to know their CEO, Keith Myers, who had founded the company with one home health agency in Palmetto, Louisiana with his wife, Ginger. And as you said, is now the largest home health company in the country. And we got to be close through that process. And then right after Katrina, I got hired by Tenet Healthcare to sell the hospitals to Ochsner in New Orleans. And so I was doing both those things at the same time. And in around 2006, 7, LHC Group, Keith Myers was like, "Hey, maybe you should come work here." At first we had 2 young kids. We were in Atlanta. Things were going great at the firm. I was like, no way. And then Keith kept coming back saying, "You should do this." And my wife and I sat down and talked, and my wife finally said, "You need to go do it." And I said, "What?" And she goes, "You should go do it because you're having a great career. You're doing really interesting stuff, but it's not your passion. Your passion is like clearly to go grow a company, be part of this growing team, and to be a leader. We could stay here and financially be great. We got lots of friends. Life is good, but you're probably not going to be all that happy when you look back just because you won't have achieved all you want to achieve in your career." So we made the jump, and I made the jump in August
Wow.
of 2008, which was the same year I made equity partner, which is a really big risk and very unusual.
And how was that different from being in private practice?
I'll tell you one thing that was in private practice, there's always a lot of pressure, but one of the things you learned quickly when I got there was like you had to live with the decisions.
Yes.
Sometimes in private practice and the client called up and said, "Hey, what should I do?" I would say, "Well, here's your 3 options," but they got to choose. And one thing I realized quickly, I was like, wow, I got to live with every decision. Like if I make the wrong one, it's on me and all these people are impacted. And
Yes.
so I enjoy that. It's not something that I'm not comfortable with. I am comfortable with it, but that was definitely a difference. And then also it was really exciting and interesting to be part of making the decisions to grow a company and then being part of it. When you went and bought something, it wasn't just go buy it, then you move on, and you had to make it work. And so that was really interesting. I love the part of not just doing the buying, but then how do we integrate it and how do we make it work? And so that was a great experience. But what happened about 18 months in was that industry, not LHC Group in particular, the entire industry went under a lot of investigations. And then I moved from doing a lot of acquisitions to really helping protect the company from all of the different investigations that impacted the entire industry. That was probably the toughest career thing I've ever been through because trying to manage the board through that, managing Keith, it was great. CEO founded the company and the challenges that would go along with that for him of having to go through something like that. But that was sort of that forged in steel moment, if you
Yes.
will. And today when difficult things happen, people come off, so I'm like, just relax. We're going to figure out a solution. Calm down. Don't get
You're battle
overly.
tested.
Yeah. So that
Yes.
really battle tested me and so it allowed me to put anything that happens into perspective.
Makes sense. You had to shift from offense, which was why you were hired, right? It was
Right.
to grow the company and to figure out strategically where
Right.
we need to go, where we need to invest, to defense. And that is, I think, illustrative of what a lot of healthcare leaders have experienced over the last handful of years, for sure.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. But both of those experiences were great. And then I'm sure you'll be like, I guess your next question will be, how'd you make that next jump?
I don't even need to be here, Pete. You're just interviewing yourself. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Then we got to 2012 and I got to be good friends with Pat Quinlan and Warner Thomas and Scott. I particularly gotten close with Warner, my predecessor, CEO of Ochsner, Warner and I've been friends for a long time. He's a dear friend. He's now the CEO of Ochsner Health out in California. And another person in my life who I've learned a lot from as a leader. And again, another person I wouldn't be sitting here today had it not been for that relationship. But he and I got to talking, and he was getting ready to be the CEO of Ochsner, and he wanted to grow Ochsner a lot. With my background and with our relationship, he said, "Hey, do you want to come do this?" And I was at that moment where I was either going to have to stay in where I was through my kids going through high school, or I had to move at that moment because my daughter was getting ready to go into seventh grade. And that was the last possible time I would move them. And again, I sat down and said, career-wise, this was the next jump. It wasn't that I couldn't have stayed at LHC. Keith and I today are great friends and stay in contact and work on things together. But it was the next jump in my career. And so that's how I ended up jumping over to Ochsner.
How many different roles have you played?
Yeah, so I did come as general counsel and was extremely involved with all of the acquisitions and partnerships. That's been something that has stuck with me from the get-go when I got to Ochsner. But then I'd say about a year and a half in, back to, I really had this desire to lead and to grow. Warner and I were talking and said, look, why don't I take this chief administrative officer role on, which allowed me to keep legal and compliance, internal audit, but then to add most of our back office services and groups like AS and supply chain and facilities and others, and also our partnership and integration team.
That's a big shift, right? I mean, you'd had your lawyer hat on for your entire career, which was 18 years or so at this point, if my math is correct. And never hold me to my math. But then now you've got your, administrative hat on, right? You're moving into a much different responsibility set. What was that like?
Yeah, so that was a big jump because prior to that job, everything I worked on, I was the expert. Like I knew it inside and out because that was how I've been raised, if you will. When I took that job on, now I had a bunch of areas that I didn't really understand everything. And so I had to move from expert to like leader. And I was like, okay, now I got to listen and I got to learn and I got to trust the people that work for me that know what they're doing to do their jobs because I can't tell our facilities people how to design a building. And so that was that first big leadership jump. And where I realized, okay, it's about building a team. It's about developing people. It's about listening. It's about putting the right people in the right places. It's about making sure there's a vision for each of the different areas. But it's not about me being an expert and executing on specific tasks anymore. And I loved it, but it definitely required me to change my thinking. And one of the things that also did was I was very much behind the curtain in my other roles. And now all of a sudden with this, there was a lot more public speaking and being out there. And I will give credit to another friend of mine, a woman named Michelle Johnston, who's a communications professor at Loyola. So I met her and said, hey, can you help me on like public speaking and communications? And tell the story that I got up to give a speech. Had all this data and all this information, and I was trying to do this. And after it was done, she said, that was awful. She says she didn't say it quite that directly, but that's what I heard. But she said, look, she goes, be yourself. Like you're trying to be someone you're not. You've read books, you've watched other people do this, and like you're trying to be someone you're not. She goes, just be yourself. She goes, just be who you are. And I will say that it's one of those other lessons that I've had along the way. It takes the stress out of it. And hopefully people realize, okay, you are just a person like us. And that resonates.
And again, what a gift that she was as direct with you as she was. It's easy to say that. It's harder to do it, though, when you've been shaped by others that you really respect and admire, and they were received in a certain way that you want to emulate. And you think that people are expecting a certain thing from you that really they're not, right? Like
Right.
they want leaders who are real, who are certainly visionary and inspirational, but are also like clearly authentic and they feel like they can connect to. So let's fast forward if we could. 18 months ago, you're named CEO of Ochsner. Is that something that you ever thought would happen for you in your career, particularly as you took the GC job initially at Ochsner?
No, I really didn't. When I got to Ochsner, I never thought I'd end up being the CEO of Ochsner. And it obviously developed with the chief administrative officer role. And then I was CFO right before I was CEO. And the last Probably 2018, our board did a great job, and Warner, to his credit, did a really great job of focusing on succession planning. And I knew he had put me on the list, but I thought, okay, I'm just on the list because I've got these jobs. I didn't ever really expect that would happen. Then when Warner told the board, hey, I'm going to go be the CEO of Sutter, our board chair, Andy Wisdom, called and said, hey, we want you to interview for the job and we think you would be the right person. And if I'm being totally honest, I never really dreamed that would happen. I can remember Andy called me I talked to him on a Sunday, and I also talked to Warner about it as well, of course. Then I was had to go interview for the job. And I don't mind saying on this podcast, you helped me with that. After the board knew and I had to interview, I was like, who can help me figure out how to think about my message and just be my friend and advisor in what was a really stressful week getting ready to interview for this job. And the person I called was you, and you helped me with that. And as I say, I don't know that I would have this job if it wasn't for you, but so it's special that you were willing to help me out in that moment.
You're very gracious. It was one of the greatest pleasures and honors of my career. And it's really easy to assist someone who just wants to be 100% who they are. So you did
Yeah.
all that, but congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
And now I look back on the last 18 months, and you have accomplished a lot in a short amount of time, because clearly we've established in this podcast that you're an overachiever. And, as I look at like the partnerships you've established with MD Anderson and Novant and the Neurosciences Center and the New Children's Hospital, and establishing the region's first HBCU medical school with Xavier, I'm sure as you look back on the last 18 months, it's a bit of a blur, but what are you most proud of that you've accomplished in this sort of early tenure?
Yeah, the thing that I'm most proud of, and I think it's my primary job, is organizing our team, the executive team that I work with every day, and creating the environment for them to go do great things. That's really fundamental to my job. I know you just mentioned a lot of stuff, but I could go through every one of those and say, here's the person who is on the executive team who led that and made that happen. It's a total credit to them. But my job, the core, is to create the right environment and to create the right resources and to support them and making all that happen. And every day when I watch them work together and do amazing stuff, that's what gets me excited. And then to watch other people that I work with develop and see them do great things and try to support them, that's the really exciting part of and joy of the job.
So what has been the hardest?
A couple of things. One was it was hard was just adapting to the public nature of the job, and just what I said earlier, okay, people now care what you say. You know what I mean? And when you talk, people are interested. And when you walk into a room and you're in a meeting, when you talk, everybody stops and listens. And that has taken some getting used to, because again, it's not how I think about myself. So I've had to adapt to that. I think the other hard thing was that I took the job in a really challenging financial time, not just for Ochsner, but for healthcare, everybody in healthcare, and having to navigate through that. And we've done a really great job. The team has done a great job, and we ended up having a good year in 23, and we're doing some great things financially. But that was a real challenge, having to take the organization through that in the first 6 to 12 months of being a new CEO. It's hard enough to adapt to that new job in perfect times, but coming right out of COVID and the challenging times the whole industry was having was tough. But again, I go back to that time at LHC where you sort of got that forged by steel moment, going through all those difficult times. That sort of prepared me for that, because I was like, okay, if I could get through all the things we had to get through there, I'm tough enough and we can make the right decisions to get through this.
So how do you think about your work and your career in the context of all these other dimensions in your life? Certainly your family and
Yeah.
also other obligations that are really important to you. Do you believe that it's possible to achieve that infamous concept of work-life balance, or is that totally outdated, particularly as you think about your role as a CEO?
Yeah. First of all, I think everybody should aspire to have that work-life balance. I think we should all aspire to it. I think that is a journey and not something you're ever going to say, okay, I've accomplished it, because I will say 1 month I might do great at that. And the next month I may not do as well at that. But it is a journey, and something I try to think about a lot. I will say that has been a big adaptation as I rolled into the CEO job, and I'm really blessed to have a great assistant, Barbara, a great chief of staff, Allison. We actually talk about that a lot. how do we not let this job take over and consume everything so that I can't also have friends and enjoy that and then also spend time with our family. I'm not saying I'm getting it right or perfect. I'm just saying I know I've got to do it. And probably weekly, we're talking about how do we get that balance right? Because I don't think you can be successful professionally long term if you don't have those other dimensions of your life. Because I I've seen a lot of people in my career who didn't try that and then they got high achievement professionally and realized, hey, it doesn't really mean anything if you don't have friends and you don't have family. So I think that's really important. And I try to say that to the people that work at Ochsner. I'm like, you got to get that right. So, when your kid has something, go to it. Make sure you're spending the right time with your family because I think for all of us, that should be the most important part of your life.
Yeah, I totally agree. But you're right. It is it's a lifelong journey. I'm trying to figure it out.
Yep.
Okay, couple more questions
And then
about
on
yeah.
that, I think when you quit worrying about it, that's when you have a problem. Like when you quit thinking about it, I think as long as you keep thinking about it and focusing on it, that's important. When you know it's important and you're trying to do right there, that's how I think you're on the right path.
That's very well said. Okay, I have a couple more questions about leadership, and then we're going to go to a lightning round. Get ready,
Awesome.
Pete. So, as you think about the characteristics of the most effective leaders, talk about what are the top three that come to mind.
One, I would say you do have to have a vision of where you want to go. I tell this story a lot when I got the CEO job. Like a couple days later, I was going up to see my daughter in New York and I was on a plane and I was sitting there going, wow, I actually have to like figure out where I think we should go with this. You know what I mean? I obviously
Uh-huh.
had put that thoughts together. I was interviewing, but like and then I got to communicate that to the organization. And so I sat down on the plane and actually wrote out these destinations of where I thought we should go as an organization. And I've really stuck to those since I got the job. You have to be a good listener and
Mm.
understand that your job is not for a bunch of people to work for you, but your job is actually to work for them, which means you got to listen to what's going on and understand it. And I think that is a really important characteristic. And then I think you got to create, it's going to be hard to do three. I think you got to create an environment where people feel safe to make mistakes, to talk about whatever's on their mind. You can't be a good leader if people are scared to tell you the truth, tell you the things that aren't going well. If you are a leader and you're creating that, it's dangerous and it's problematic. And so I think that's important. The other one is just, as we've talked about, being authentic and being yourself. Because if you try to be someone you're not, people are really smart and they'll see through you really quickly. And that includes being authentic about the things, your flaws, and, because
Sure.
we're all humans and we all have flaws.
Do you have a particular flaw in your leadership journey that you're working on?
Yeah, I probably have a couple. One is I sort of like to talk to everybody. I can be out there and people will ask me, can you come to this? And you come to that? Can you do this? Can you do that? And I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh, sure, I can. I'd love to do that. Which then back to the whole balance situation, then I have to come back and, as I said, Allison and Barbara are like, exactly how are you going to do all that? So
Uh-huh.
I don't ever want to not be that person, but also I recognize I've got to figure out a way to do that better so that I'm not, because otherwise you won't get that work-life balance correct. Another one that is interesting is I'm on the border of introvert and extrovert. I love people, but I'm not one of these people that walks in a big room of people and like gives you energy. Like, after a week of doing that, I've got to make sure I have recharge time. And then I will say this is always a challenge. I'm a fixer, see problem, fix problem. And every now and then I have to remember people are telling me stuff and my job is necessarily is not to fix it. It's to listen and guide and let them
Right.
go fix it. And so that's, that's something I have to work on.
That's the lawyer in you.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I'm a fixer. Yeah.
And what role, if any, does spirituality or faith play in your life and for you as a leader?
Yeah. A lot. We go to St. Charles Avenue Presbyterian Church. We have a great minister, Chris Curry, that Steph actually chaired the search committee for Chris. And the week the announcement was going to come out that I was going to be CEO, I actually went and sat with Chris and he and I prayed together. And he actually sent me a really great prayer that I read the morning that I had to announce this just to all of our top 75 or 80 leaders. And there's been two or three times since I've been CEO where I knew I had to give a really important message. And I've gone to Chris and he and I've talked about it and just because faith is part of it. and trying to make sure I'm measured and centered in the messaging. And so I will go to him, and he and I will talk about those things. So it's
That's
important.
fantastic. Yeah. All right, we have come to the end of our time together, Pete, and we're going to do a quick lightning round.
All right, perfect.
All right, so these are like quick gut answers.
Got it. Okay. All right.
All right, here we go. You ready?
Let's do this.
Kentucky basketball or Louisiana football?
Kentucky basketball.
Obviously. Okay, so for those UK basketball fans out there, watching Jeff Shepherd handle the ball in the 90s or his son Reed dominate in 2024?
Jeff in the 90s, because Jeff won a national championship,
Yes.
which is why Reed needs to stay and come back next year and win a national championship. And then I would convert to Reed. But right now I got to say Jeff, because Dad won a championship.
I totally agree. Okay.
Yeah.
Favorite thing to do on a Saturday?
Favorite thing to do on a Saturday is go to lunch with my son.
Oh,
Yeah, when he was growing up, that was our tradition. He and I would go to lunch every Saturday. And whenever he's around, he and I go to lunch. That's my favorite thing to do on a Saturday.
that's pretty cool. Okay, last time you tried something new?
Actually, a couple weeks ago, I snorkeled for the first time and I paddle boarded for the first time. We were on a vacation with the kids. We were in the ocean and I had the chance to snorkel and paddleboard. And that was something I hadn't done.
That is very cool. Paddleboarding looks easy, actually a great workout.
Incredible workout and very humbling because it looks easy, but then you stand on that board, you're in the ocean, there's waves. I fell over a few times till I figured it out. Yeah.
Book you're reading now. I know you're a big reader.
Right now, actually, I just got a book yesterday about hospitality. The name of it is, it's not Unbridled Hospitality, but it's sitting over there on my desk. And that's the book. I actually started looking at it last night to read, which I think talks really what we're doing in healthcare is we're trying to transform ourselves to be always to be that great service organization where people are getting things the way they want in other aspects of their life. And then Make Your Bed by Abram McCraven, who is a SEAL. That sits by my bed and I read that an awful lot. And then I never read one book at a time. I read a couple, and I'm reading Masters of the Air. I'm a big World War II history guy. So I watched the show on Apple TV, but I wanted to read the book to see if the show matched the book, and it does. And so those are the three books that I'm going back and forth between.
Okay, and best book on leadership?
Leaders Eat Last.
I have that.
Yep.
Right here.
Yep. Leaders Eat Last.
You told me you wrote it.
Sitting here today, that's my favorite book on leadership. It embodies, as I said, we work for the people that in the organization, they don't work for us. And I think if I were to sum up that book, it says a lot about that.
All right, Pete, I'm going to ask you the question that every good reporter asks at the end of an interview. It's a dangerous one. Is there anything more you'd like to share with us?
I would just say to everybody coming up in leadership, we've said it a bunch, be yourself. Don't try to be something you're not. You don't have to be perfect. Your most important thing is to listen and help others. It's not about you. If you can keep that in mind, you'll be just fine.
Thank you for all that you've shared today, for your willingness to be vulnerable, and just for your friendship. It's an honor to have kind of walked with you over the last decade.
Yeah, same to you. And you've done great things as well. And next time I'm going to interview you. How about that?
Okay. All right, Pete. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.